Flashy million-dollar cinematic gaming trailers with fancy voice acting from today's biggest celebrities that never seem to show actual gameplay footage. Generic and mundane gameplay mechanics constructed around mass appeal in order to make it as accessible to as many demographics as possible rather than be something unique and, well, fun. And let's not forget about predatory microtransactions and egregious battle passes that sucks the life's blood of the player as well as the game. AAA gaming, ladies and gentlemen, this is what it's come to. But stay a while and listen as I give you, my fellow gamers, hope once more by showing you a different path, a righteous path, a sensual path. So join me as I take a gander into AAA versus Indie Studio Gaming. Hello ladies and gents, Jarek Defiler the Patient Gamer here, and boy has it been a long time since I've done a video. Blame my newborn baby girl that arrived a bit early. She's taken up all my time and money. Who thought that babies would be so expensive? I mean, did you know you have to feed them more than once a week? Crazy. Anywho, I'm here to talk about something that has been stirring the gaming industry's pot quite a bit in the recent months, if not years. AAA versus Indie Studio Gaming. Now, I'm sure we all know what makes a AAA studio what it is, but let me go over the basics so we're all on the same page in regard to this video. What I mean when I say AAA studio is that it's usually a subsidiary of a massive corporation or company that, although granting said studio copious amounts of funds, marketing, and logistical support, often can make things messy by applying executive pressure on the developers based on nonsense data, such as supposed research from consultation organizations or focus groups. Just bleh. AAA studios are also generally not their own publishers, rather subject to a major gaming or media company such as Sony, Activision, or EA, among others. Basically, AAA studios are party to the man. Not always a bad thing, mind you, but it is what it is. Now, as far as indie studios go, many have their own interpretations of the term. For clarification in this video, I will give mine, which is 100% correct, and no one's opinion can differ lest they be subject to enucleation of the eye, so saith the God King Richard Simmons. So some will say what makes an indie studio independent is its small size, others its budget. Some might say if it's not publicly traded, it's considered indie, while others might argue that indie studios just can't have a parent company. There are also those that would say indie studios are always their own publishers. These are all valid points, and I'm not here to argue what I think is correct or incorrect about them because, hey, despite my joke earlier, I'm not the Pope of gaming, so what the fuck do I know? I'm just here to give my opinion. And in the context of this video, I will classify what I think indie studios are, which is a gaming development company that basically is beholden to no one except the customers. This would put it in the category of having no third-party publisher, no parent company, not publicly traded, and is basically ran by the developers. Size doesn't matter in my opinion because you can have 100 employees and still be independent. The greatest current example of this would be Larian Studios, which has become my favorite studio over the last couple of years for a variety of reasons really, but let me just have them tell it in their own words. Have a quick listen to their acceptance speech for Baldur's Gate 3 winning Game of the Year at the 27th Annual DICE Awards.
To add to that, a lot of people probably want to know what's the secret to your success. Last year I started thinking the secret to our success is the decisions that we make come from what does the player want? What do I think is best for the game? What is the most fun? What is the most crazy? People telling us we shouldn't do this or we can't do it or this is too challenging or too hard, like it was already said here today, that usually just gives us a kick up the arse to actually make it happen. The stuff that we make at Larian is we ask you to pay one price only for the game, and that's it. You can own it for the rest of your life. We don't have shareholders, but we also don't think about them. And we think there's an expression in Dutch that honesty lasts longest or something. There's probably a version in English as well that makes a lot of sense. But what we have tried in the last 20 years is to treat people like we would like to be treated ourselves as players, as gamers. So we don't make decisions where we think this could make us the most money. On the long run, building a community, building a player base, building games that are actually fun is going to make you the most money. That's it.
Yeah, these are a group of devs that are worth giving your hard-earned money to, and maybe even your innocence. But as the gaming industry as a whole continues to bloom, the indie scene has become more and more mainstream. We have a plethora of examples to look at over the last decade or more, even titles that are created by just one person. So as time goes on, it seems that the apex of gaming quality is no longer in the realm of AAA games. Quite the contrary. When I see every new controversy or scandal revolving around whatever major corporation or company that decided to make some dumb decision on how they treat their customers or build their game, my eyes begin to roll back more and more with each bit of news to the point I'm staring at my ass while standing upright because it's simply gotten to where it's become expected. Let's take a look at a recent example in that of Helldivers 2. This game arrived on the scene with the explosive power of 1,000 Oktoberfest farts. Garnishing massive community support and millions of copies sold, this game, developed by the same studio that did The Great Magica, was an absolute powerhouse for about a month. Then what happened? Well, its publisher, Sony, happened. They decided to implement a mandatory PlayStation Network sign-up for all users, including those on PC, who make up the majority of the game's player base, or at least they did. Needless to say, PC gamers did not take kindly to this, resulting in massive review bombing of Helldivers 2 on the Steam platform. And although the reviews have somewhat cleaned up since Sony decided to reverse that decision, there are still many areas around the globe that are region locked from Helldivers 2 as a result. The damage has been done, and it's unlikely Helldivers 2 will ever reach its overwhelmingly positive review status ever again, not to mention its active player count. Shameful because it was a pretty good game. Personally, I didn't care for it that much, not really my style. Maybe in my younger days I would have enjoyed it, but even though I didn't really like it, I am more than willing to acknowledge that it was a fun, entertaining romp. We also have another problem of multiple titles coming out, or that have already come out, that show signs of tampering with the original story or characters in order to achieve proper DEI practices at the hands of socio-political activist organizations such as the infamous Sweet Baby Inc. If you manage to not fall down that rabbit hole yet, I will leave it to you to decide whether or not that story is worth your time. It probably is. And forgive me, I'm not trying to be political here, but it is clear that a variety of AAA games have suffered as a result of such consultation organizations that steer the games away from the developer's initial vision and into the realm of wokeness. And as a result, we get poor writing with unimpressive stories, bland, stereotypical characters, and generic, boring mechanics. You don't really see this in indie studios, mainly because they have the power to make their own decisions and generally exercise it stoically, as well as simply lacking the funds to hire said consultation organizations, thank Zeus. So instead, indie studios will continue to make the games they want to make from the onset. No devil on their shoulder to whisper dark nothings in their ear and prick and prod to get whatever agenda they as the consultant wishes to push at the detriment of the game's quality. Because you have to remember, ladies and gents, consultants don't have a stake in the game's or studio's outcome. They get paid regardless and are long gone by the time the game releases, so they have no problem swooping in and throwing a handful of diarrhea mucus balls onto the graduation cake, and then bailing while brushing off their hands as if they actually did something admirable. If the game does well, they can take credit for being involved. If the game fails, they can state it was probably the other factors in development rather than their own consulting. I mean, who can fact check that really, outside of the devs who worked with them, but they're most likely not willing to speak up lest they lose their jobs. Thankfully, indie studios tend to not use consultants as much, if at all, compared to AAA studios that seem to use them religiously as of late. Moving on, one of the most important factors that a succulent gamer like yourself should also consider is risk-taking. Who is willing or even adamant about taking risks in their game development? Large studios that have a plethora of executives and shareholders they're accountable to, not to mention the parent companies that may always be breathing down their sausage-laden necks. Or is it the 2, 3, or maybe dozen dudes and dudettes that probably put their own hard-earned money and, even more importantly, their time into a project in which they are drooling in anticipation to see it come to fruition? Sure, they might not be making the big bucks currently as AAA studios devs do, but they got a vision, a plan, are beholden to no one, and are also probably huge South Park fans, so who knows how that slips its way into the writing.
God damn it!
And let's not forget that indie studios tend to be big-time gamers and nerds themselves. Just take a look at Swen Vincke, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the CEO and founder of the great Larian Studios that I mentioned earlier, as well as having been the director of Baldur's Gate 3 and Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, some of the best RPGs ever made, yeah. This dude walks around in suits of medieval armor for promotional videos and during award shows. You can tell that this is a man that loves great games and that passion bleeds into his work. More of this, please. So one great example of indie dev risk-taking is that of Chris Hunt during his development of the outstanding Kenshi. According to Wikipedia, take that with a bucket of salt, Mr. Hunt worked as a part-time security guard in order to pay the bills while he was the sole developer of Kenshi. After a few years, the game began to achieve some success with crowdfunding and he was able to work on it full-time and eventually hire a small team to help out. The result was one of the most unique and downright ambitious sandbox RPGs I have ever had the pleasure of playing. Check out my video on Kenshi if you're interested in learning more about this absolute masterpiece. None of this would have come to pass if Chris Hunt didn't take some risks, not only in his daily life, but in the game's mechanics as well, for Kenshi has some very cool and downright innovative mechanics. Sex with Kenshi. So that's another notch in the indie team's belt, but to be fair, what advantages does AAA Studios have over indie? Well, most of it is fairly obvious, and I mentioned it already, but funds would be the biggest advantage. Working for a corporation means tons and tons of money. However, you can't really spend it like you wish unless the parent company is very, very lax in giving you freedom as a developer. Odds are they aren't, but who knows? Talent pool is another great advantage of AAA studios. They can afford top talent in the gaming development realm, recruiting and stealing people from other studios from all over the world. But if that talent isn't allowed to flourish in a free environment, what use is it really outside of just getting the assembly line to pump out more drag faster? Big budget means big, pretty, shiny games, another advantage AAA studios have. However, and you know where I'm going with this, what's the point of having awe-inspiring cinematic trailers, gorgeous graphics, flashy combat, and the most expensive celebrity voice actors in the world if your game is boring as hell with mechanics that seem to have been implemented by a mentally disabled toddler? Because let's be honest, my friends, as it stands, most AAA games as of late are generally big as a lake, shallow as a layer of mouth-breather frat boy drool pooling on the urine-stained hardwood floors of his frat house after a night-long bender. But does that mean all hope is lost, ladies and gents? I say no. For starters, if you're a patient gamer such as myself, you most likely have a backlog of games dating back to the Paleolithic era. And if you're a PC gamer, you can multiply that log by 10. And if there's one thing you can say about PC gamers, we are a patient bunch. So there's never a shortage of games to play if a recent title we were looking forward to doesn't pan out. Also, not all AAA games are nefarious or bad, mostly just the Western ones, but there are still some that seem to be decent. Everyone has been praising God of War, for example. Remnant 2 from last year seems to be pretty well liked, but as far as 2024 releases, I'm a bit out of touch to be honest. None really caught my attention. That said, why not do as I do when it comes to film and television lately? Look to Asia. Japan and Korea have been absolutely dominating in the gaming market with bangers such as Elden Ring, Stellar Blade, virtually anything Nintendo, and a decent amount of PC titles as well. Dragon's Dogma 2 has mixed reviews right now, but it seems to be mostly due to performance and bugs rather than gameplay, so take that as you will. Although Capcom and Sony have been pretty dirty lately, but the games are still pretty good, I would say. Other than that, look to the indie scene. There is a plethora of phenomenal games out there, many of which have gone under people's radar. You also have V Rising, which is amazing and I can't get enough of it, although the studio, Stunlock Studios, based out of Sweden, is apparently majority owned by Tencent, the Chinese behemoth. V Rising was still developed and published by Stunlock Studios with a perfectly reasonable price point and no BS microtransactions. All the DLCs are simply dev supporter packs with cosmetics that you don't need at all, so is it technically an indie studio in the context of this video? Not really, I guess, but it seems to have been developed and maintained like one. I love it personally. And at the end of the day, the world will always be shades of gray, am I right? So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, my take on AAA versus indie studios in our current time of 2024. I will always be in the indie studio camp myself, personally. I find that indie games are always more willing to take risks, experiment, and be far more innovative in exchange for something that's familiar or comfortable in order to gain a mass audience as easily as possible. Basically, indie games are generally made for the love of games by gamers first, not necessarily to put a bit more weight in the wallet. Not that there's anything wrong with money being a main goal, it just tends to cloud the vision of the project. And what many indie devs I think realize is, if you make a good game, people will buy it.
On the long run, building a community, building a player base, building games that are actually fun is going to make you the most money.
Sure, it might go under some radars, but the word will get out there eventually. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do with this channel. Sure, I'm small right now and still trying to grow, but one of the reasons I focus on patient gaming is so that I can go back and recommend all these great older titles that many may have missed, and I'm not the only one. There's always a market for great games, no matter how old. And I'm also not entirely blackpilled on AAA studios either. I think there may be a shift happening where the big names are realizing that gamers aren't as tolerant as they once were. Putting out half-assed games and then trying to fix them later is not cutting it anymore. Trying to cater to small fringe socio-political activist groups also isn't working because it just alienates the rest of their audience, and the majority of the time the people in these groups aren't even really gamers, they're just, well, activists. Gamers are getting sick of being preached to or told how evil they are because they don't like a certain poorly written or designed character that just happens to be a woman of color. Ugh, someone who's half black, I hate that term. So stupid. But yeah, I'm hopeful. I think things are starting to turn around, and I think that now, with today's technology and information on the internet, virtually anyone can be an indie dev. And I implore you, if your goal is to make great games, don't wait. Don't think you have to go to school or join some major company, because you don't. The tools are all out there in the World Wide Webs. Anyone can make a game from their home office, and I encourage everyone who wishes to do so. But just don't forget what made you want to do it in the first place. Hopefully that is to simply make great games. Okay, now I'm rambling and this video has gone way longer than I expected. So, what do you guys think? You feel that AAA studios are over? In the West at least? Do you think they're learning from the errors of their ways? Or do you think indie studios are the future and that's where our money should be focused? Let me know in the comments as I am curious on what the consensus is. Anywho, thanks for watching my humble little video. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to help grow the channel. It would be much appreciated. This has been Jarek Defiler, the Patient Gamer, basking in the revelry of indie games. You all have a great morning, afternoon, evening, or night depending on where you are. And game on, my friends. Game on.